to take the majority, and on 9 occasions to lead our conference. Serving as a Republican leader was a rare and, yes, rather specific childhood dream. And just about a year ago, I thanked my colleagues for their confidence, which allowed me to fulfill it. To the distinguished members of this body, I've had the privilege to lead, and I remain deeply, deeply grateful. Today, however, it's appropriate for me to speak about an even deeper allegiance and even longer standing gratitude. 7 times, my fellow Kentuckians have sent me to the Senate. Every day in between, I've been humbled by the trust they placed in me to do their business right here. Representing our Commonwealth has been the honor of a lifetime. I will not seek this honor an 8th time. My current term in the Senate will be my last. I've been a student of history my entire life. I can't remember the last time I didn't have a stack of biographies or political memoirs on my nightstand. And I know well how tempting it can be to read history with a sense of determinism, assuming that somehow notorious failures were inevitable, that crowning triumphs were predestined, and in either case, that lives and careers followed orderly paths. This, of course, isn't how things work. And I've never had to look further than my own life to recognize it. I've never lost sight of the fact that without my mother's devoted care, a childhood encounter with polio could have turned out a lot worse. That unless my father had taken a job in the bluegrass state, my interest in politics might have run a course somewhere else. But if it weren't for an 11th hour outside the box idea on the campaign trail, my Senate career would have been over before it began. Or that, if not for the people of Kentucky, time and again, agreeing that leadership delivers and electing me to send back here, it would have been someone else from somewhere else taking that seat at the table where I've had a chance to work, strategize, fight, and win. I grew up reading about the greatness of Henry Clay, but there were times when the prospect of etching my name into his desk in this chamber felt like more of a long shot than making it to the major leagues. I got a front row seat to the greatness of Senator John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky as a summer intern in his office. But at so many moments in my early career, the idea of following in his footsteps felt more distant than the moon. So the only appropriate thing to take away today, apart from a healthy dose of pride, is my immense gratitude for the opportunity to take part in the consequential business of the Senate and the nation. Gratitude to the people I represent, Kentucky's families and farmers and miners and service members and small business owners. Gratitude to loyal friends, dedicated volunteers, and talented staff who've helped me serve much better. Gratitude to this institution that has repaid my devotion so generously over the years, and to so many colleagues who've become great friends. Gratitude for my family's support. And in particular, my ultimate teammate and confidant of the last 32 years. Elaine's leadership and wise counsel in their own right have made her the most seasoned cabinet official in modern history. On top of all that, her devotion to me and to Kentucky is a lot more than I deserve. When I arrived at this chamber, I wasn't coming with a governor's statewide executive experience or a House member's appreciation for Washington dynamics. I knew my hometown of Louisville, and I'd spent the previous few years working hard to learn what mattered to folks all across the rest of the Commonwealth. And yet, within weeks of swearing the oath, sure enough, I was here on the floor talking with colleagues from other far-flung corners of the country, discussing solutions to a farm income crisis and infrastructure challenge that affected different states in the same way. I learned quickly that delivering for Kentucky meant finding the ways the Commonwealth's challenges were actually tied to national debates. Seeing to it that major agriculture legislation remembered Kentucky farmers and particularly included when they needed extraordinary assistance, like the tobacco buyout. Making sure that nationwide steps on transportation infrastructure included resources for modernizing the Brent Spence Bridge, which supports billions of dollars in economic activity in Kentucky and the surrounding region. And with the trust of a local community, finishing the task first assigned by President Reagan, the safe destruction of America's legacy chemical weapons at the Bluegrass Army Depot. So efforts like these have spanned the length of my Senate career, and I've been humbled each and every opportunity to help Kentucky punch above its weight. Of course, the Senate has to grapple with foundational questions that reach even more broadly across American life and either further into posterity. We're trusted on behalf of the American people to participate in the appointment of the federal judiciary, to be the final check on the assembly of power in the courts beyond the reach of representative politics, and to ensure that the men and women who preside over them profess authentic devotion to the rule of law above all else. When members of this body ignore, discount, or pervert this fundamental duty, they do so not just at the peril of the Senate, but of the whole nation. The weight of our power to advise and consent has never been lost on me, and I've been honored to perform my role in confirming judges who understand their role. On this floor, there's no place to hide from the obligations of Article 1, the Senate's unique relationship with Article 3, or our role in equipping the powers of Article 2. Here, every debate over agriculture or infrastructure or education or taxes is downstream of the obligations of national security. Every question of policy here at home is contingent on our duty to provide for the common defense. One of the first times I spoke at length on this floor as a freshman, I was compelled to join the debate over strengthening the deterrence of America's nuclear triad. Whether to expand the U.S. military's hard target nuclear capability was an interesting question to pose to someone whose most recent job had been running a county government. But there, of course, was the founder's brilliance at work. The hopes and dreams of every American are tied up in our ability to protect and defend the nation and its interests. Every family traveling abroad and every worker and small business owner whose livelihood depends on foreign trade, they depend in turn on the credibility of America's commitments to friends and the strength of her threats to enemies. In turn, the safety and success of the men and women who volunteer to serve this great nation in uniform depend on the work we do here to ensure that enemies think twice before challenging them, and those enemies never face a fair fight. Thanks to Ronald Reagan's determination, the work of strengthening America's hard power was well underway when I arrived in the Senate. But since then, we've allowed that power to atrophy. And today, a dangerous world threatens to outpace the work of rebuilding it. So lest any of our colleagues still doubt my intentions for the remainder of my term, I have some unfinished business to attend to. In our work, most of us in this body develop an appreciation for the Senate itself, its written rules, its collegial norms, its pace of play. And yet so often I've watched colleagues depart, venting their frustration at the confines of the institution or mourning what they perceive to be decline of its norms. Regardless of the political storms that may wash over this chamber during the time I have remaining, I assure our colleagues that I will depart with great hope for the endurance of the Senate as an institution. There are any number of reasons for pessimism, but the strength of the Senate is not one of them. This chamber is still the haven where the political minority can require debate. It's still the crucible in which jurists are tested for their fidelity to upholding the Constitution and laws as they were written. The Senate is still equipped for work of great consequence. And to the disappointment of my critics, I'm still here on the job. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator, North Carolina.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the members and staff and spectators in the gallery be allowed to applaud for a period not to exceed 30 seconds.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, in about 2 hours, the Senate will vote on whether to confirm Kash Patel to serve as Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations for the next...
Order.
To serve as Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations for the next 10 years. 10 years, Mr. President. If Senate Republicans confirm Mr. Patel, I believe they will come to regret this vote, probably sooner rather than later. I, for one, am convinced that Mr. Patel has neither the experience, the judgment, nor the temperament to lead this amazing criminal investigative agency. It appears my Senate Republican colleagues are ignoring the many red flags in Mr. Patel's record, probably because they fear retribution from the President and Mr. Musk. Let me be clear. This is not a partisan issue. During my time in the Senate, I have voted for 4 FBI director nominations before this one. Each one was clearly a Republican, and I voted for them nevertheless. Historically, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been apolitical. I oppose Mr. Patel because he is dangerously politically extreme. He has repeatedly expressed his intention to use our nation's most important law enforcement agency to retaliate against his political enemies. Even before President Trump took office, Mr. Patel announced that he would force out FBI Director Chris Wray, who he nominated in his first term before firing the former FBI Director Jim Comey. The director is the only political appointment at the FBI. Congress took steps to ensure that this agency remains as apolitical as possible by providing for a single term of 10 years for a director and subjecting the appointment to the advice and consent of the Senate. 50 years ago, we made this reform. We may see it all fall to ashes today. But as we have seen for weeks now, the Trump administration purge of the FBI is a political exercise that has spread to service career officials. There's an association of FBI agents, and the 2 leaders of that association came to see me recently in my office to talk about this situation. Both of them are women. One is serving 17 years in the career job at the FBI, and the other 22. They were quick to add that their fathers had been FBI agents before them. It was clearly in their blood. They came to tell me about the situation at the FBI today because of this transition and because of the prospect of Kash Patel heading their agency. They said morale has never been lower. They've gone through, many of them, gone through many presidential transitions and have never seen anything like this. The declaration that is required now of FBI agents as to whether they were participating in the investigation of the January 6 rioters who assaulted this United States Capitol building. Let's be honest about what's going on here. There's an effort to have Soviet-style historical revision. The Trump administration and the people that they're pushing into leadership have to basically pass a loyalty oath in terms of the outcome of the previous presidential election and what happened on January 6th. They're somehow asked to ignore the obvious that we see on videotape over and over again. The rioters assaulted this Capitol. It was so dangerous that the Vice President of the United States, sitting in your chair, was physically removed by the Secret Service for fear that he was going to be hurt if he stayed in that position. Those of us who are on the floor of the Senate on January 6th were asked to evacuate this chamber as quickly as possible. This was not simply a question of tourists getting out of line. These people who assaulted this U.S. Capitol building were hell-bent on stopping the constitutional process of counting the electoral votes in the 2020 election. And now, FBI and others are being asked to say the opposite, that this wasn't somehow a breach of law, a horrendous, terrible chapter in the history of this country, and that there was danger afoot. Because the president has given a sweeping pardon to the 1,600 who were prosecuted for trespass, seditious conspiracy, the use of firearms in the Capitol, and the like, we are supposed to somehow discount this as a significant moment in American history. It was. And for the FBI agents who participated in the investigation of that day, I say they were doing their job, and they did it well. And now to remove them from the FBI because of that has obviously hurt the morale of the FBI agency and made them stop and wonder what the future holds for them if another president comes in with another political agenda. Will they be the victims again? As we've seen for weeks now, the Trump administration's purge of the FBI is a political exercise that has spread to senior career officials. In the FBI long history, this has never happened before. This purge has dramatically weakened the FBI's ability to combat national security threats and it has made America less safe. Senior leaders with collectively hundreds of years of experience have been forced out, creating a leadership vacuum. Thousands of line agents fear losing their jobs simply because they were assigned to work on cases involving the January 6th attack or President Trump. I have heard directly from FBI agents who now fear for their safety and the safety of their families. To understand why, let me tell you about a January 6th rioter named Edward Kelly. Mr. Kelly was convicted of assaulting law enforcement during the attack on the U.S. Capitol. We saw it, didn't we? In terms of videotapes that show our law enforcement agents trying to stand their ground in this Capitol building, being beaten back and assaulted by these mobs. Mr. Kelly was convicted of assaulting law enforcement, and he was given a full and unconditional pardon by Donald Trump. But Mr. Kelly has also been convicted in his home state of Tennessee of conspiracy to murder the FBI agents who investigated his role in the January 6th attack. Understand this. Now he is arguing that President Trump's blanket pardon of Mr. Kelly should cover his attempt to kill FBI agents. When asked about the possible firings of career FBI officials at his confirmation hearing, Mr. Patel, under oath, and I quote, said, "I don't know what's going on right now at the FBI." Mr. President, that's not true. Thanks to multiple brave whistleblowers, we now know that Mr. Patel likely committed perjury in making that statement. Even before being confirmed as an FBI director, Mr. Patel is already directing the ongoing purge of honorable career public servants. Despite his status as a private citizen, he has no right to be part of this awful process. I urge my Republican colleagues, seriously, consider these credible whistleblower allegations before you vote on Mr. Patel's nomination. Mr. Patel's claim about an FBI purge were not his only misleading statements under oath. At his hearing, Mr. Patel implausibly told me he could not recall Stu Peters, a man who's been identified as an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier. I asked him repeatedly, "What about Stu Peters?" "Don't know the man, don't recognize the name." This is simply not true. Considering that Mr. Patel appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 times, Mr. President, 8 times, and he couldn't recall the man's name. And Mr. Peters has since revealed that he and Mr. Patel directly communicate via their personal cell phones, quote, constantly was the word he used. As far as Patel was concerned under oath, never heard of the man. Why in the world would he do that? Why would Mr. Patel admit the obvious? 8 podcasts and constant communication with this man?